This is Judaism Unbound, episode 518, Diasporist, Jewish Day School. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Lex Rofberg, and Dan is also here today, but I am kicking in the intro in his stead this week. We are so excited to be diving into a great conversation with Leah Robbins, who is the founder of Achvat Olam, a diaspora community day school. One note as we start, and this will come up in the course of the conversation, this Jewish day school, this diaspora Jewish day school, Achvat Olam, doesn't exist yet. It hopefully will in a few years, but this is a rare episode in the Judaism Unbound canon where we are fully future tense. We're talking about what this will be. And as an organization that was initially founded as the Institute for the Next Jewish Future, that is right in our wheelhouse. So we're excited to have this conversation and have another conversation soon afterwards where we are looking at Jewish education further. That will be in 2 weeks. So a little bit of context for this episode. Leah Robbins is launching a school that is in some ways traditional. It's a Jewish day school. And in some ways it's not so traditionalist. It plans to be a diaspora-focused Jewish day school connected to notions of diasporism. We will talk more about what that means in the body of the episode. But suffice to say, it plans to focus on ways of relating to Judaism and Jewishness that are not centered on Zionism and the nation-state of Israel. This, as you can expect, gets some people really excited and energized and other people surprised and maybe critical. And we're going to talk about all of that over the course of this conversation. Before we do, quick Judaism Unboundment. We have had our mini courses in the Onion Yeshiva begin. You can sign up for them still at judaismunbound.com/classes. We always keep it open through the first week. And since only one class has happened, you can still register, but you will not be able to after the second class of our mini courses. So this is your last chance. Head to judaismunbound.com/classes if you'd like to sign up. Also, we have Shabbat Unbound tonight as this episode is being released, looking at the prayer Ma'ariv Aravim as part of our 12-month-long Shabbat service. You can gather with us by registering at judaismunbound.com/Shabbat. And if you're listening to this after the release date, don't fear, you have an action step too. You can head to the same link, judaismunbound.com/Shabbat, and sign up for future months so you don't, in the future, have the situation you're having now where you're only hearing about an awesome gathering after it's happened. So, unbouncements are concluded. Now, a little bit about our guest, Leah Robbins. Leah Robbins is the manager of individual giving at a national Jewish social justice organization and is a graduate of the Hornstein program, with masters in both Jewish professional leadership and Near Eastern and Judaic studies from Brandeis University. She is an activist, a Hebrew calligrapher, and member of the Boston community Chevra Kadisha. That's a burial society. Robbins served as the development chair and the co-chair of the Israel-Palestine Task Force of the Kavod Ritual and Organizing Community in Boston. She sits on the steering committee of Ve'ahavta, a synagogue that describes its orientation as Judaism beyond Zionism, and she is also the founding director of Achvat Olam. That's the subject of our conversation today, the first and only diasporist and liberatory Jewish day school with intentions to open with a kindergarten in the Boston area in 2029. Leah Robbins, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I think that our listeners might expect, or folks might expect, that we might start, or that I might start asking you about the whole diaspora part of Achvat Olam. But actually, I wanted to start by asking you about the day school part, because we actually haven't had a lot of conversations on Judaism Unbound about Jewish day schools. My initial impulse is to imagine that most unbound Jews are thinking that they're not going to send their kids to Jewish day school. So I thought it would be really interesting to talk to somebody who, I think is pretty unbound and is starting a Jewish day school and just understanding what is it about a day school that is something that you want to have.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to a very small Schechter school in Northeast Florida. And what I loved so much about going to Jewish day school was that it made Judaism and Jewish practice what I like to call the wallpaper of my life. So not an extracurricular activity, not something, I did on the weekends or in the afternoons, but it made Jewish practice and Jewish life woven throughout the fabric of my everyday. So I might be davening or praying in the morning with my classmates and like any regular tween, maybe like passing notes or not really paying attention. But years later, those melodies and those words have really stuck with me. And what that has allowed for is for me to be able to walk into most Jewish spaces or in a Jewish prayer space and really know what's going on. And I feel like as a Jewish adult in lots of sort of progressive and left Jewish spaces, that sense of belonging and understanding really feels like currency. Day school just really offers robust and immersive Jewish learning, which is so important for positive and deep identity development.
And so I think that you're talking about the benefits of day school, and I'm curious like how you think about the downsides. It's interesting because a lot of the times when we're talking about day school, when I've talked about day school in my life, I feel like I'm talking to people that are very religious or very much like their Jewish life is very isolated from other parts of life. And it kind of makes sense that they want to send their kids to day school. But even there, I'm kind of saying, but don't you want to be more integrated into the world? And isn't there a way to do Jewish education that doesn't require us taking our kids out of regular, public schools and whatnot? So I'm curious about how you think about those potential downsides, the isolation, the fact that you're only with other Jewish kids, or that you're, that I guess it's the wallpaper of your life, but, I don't know, maybe what's the right metaphor? Maybe all your house is the same wallpaper. It's the
Totally. Yeah, no, that's something we're trying to think about with a lot of care and intentionality because, at the end of the day, the school is for progressive and people who identify as leftists, and those folks are going to be really committed to public school, as they should. So we are trying to have a two-pronged approach. One prong is to connect our students to their public school and non-Jewish peers on school time on a semi-regular basis. How we're going to do that is very much to be determined, but that is a commitment of ours because we also agree that siloing Jewish children is not great. And I know that there were downsides for that for me, but I think there are creative ways to go about it to mitigate that impact. And then also to say that public education is a value of the school. We want the school itself to participate in some way in local organizing that's happening in Greater Boston that's already exists to protect public education. So maybe if there were like a teacher strike or something, we would, and they were raising money for a strike fund, we might solicit our families to contribute to that, or maybe we would take our kids to the picket line. And also at the end of the day, there's totally a cost to that. And we really own that. I just think that there's so much to Jewish life that can't be captured just a couple of hours a week. And I think that robust and thick Jewish education is what's going to allow the movement I'm a part of, the Jewish left, to be real players in sort of pushing back against the mainstream's claim on Jewish life, Jewish practice, and what Jews think or believe in any given moment.
It feels like an important moment for our show in many ways because the concept of a diasporist or not Zionist Jewish day school, in its very existence, it opens up the conversation of Jewish theories of change. Is the route for people, there's a set of people who are often our listeners. They have different issues with Jewish life, right? But they look at the Jewish institutional ecosystem and they say, these Jewish institutions are not working in certain ways. This is a huge percentage, the heartbeat of our listenership in many ways, because that's like what we've been talking about from different angles since our founding. The next question is, okay, do we set out to create organizations, institutions that resemble those organizations, but sort of with better ideas, with different ways of seeing the world? Like, is that what we want to do? Or is there a systemic set of issues where we want to fundamentally alter the kind of institutional ecosystem that we inhabit? And so we wouldn't replicate sort of the most commonly seen central Jewish organizations like a Jewish day school, like a federation, like a synagogue, like we could go down the list of things people see as legacy organizations. And I don't have a clear-cut answer to that. I personally am drawn more, I get more jazzed about the project of doing things that look different. I do know that in the question of day schools in particular, I am definitely part of the group of people you describe who feel ideologically committed to public schools. It's funny, I didn't go to one myself. I went to a private school that was not technically like religiously affiliated in any respect. I believe I would not be a rabbi. I believe I would not be working in Jewish life if I had gone to Jewish day school. I say that not to be like a contrarian or to be annoying to you or anyone else, but I say it because I think there is this notion out there that sort of the more Jewish a kid has in childhood, the more Jewish their life will be as an adult. And isn't that great? And don't we want that? I don't think that that's true for a lot of people. I think for a lot of us, we like being different from our surroundings. And so if my wallpaper, if my daily existence had been Judaism, I would have been like, new wallpaper, not my thing. I'm going to have a passion for something else. And maybe that's a me thing. Again, I'm truly not saying that is dismissive. Like, I do think I have whatever personality traits that make this true of me, but I don't think I'm alone. So I'd love to hear, like, what would you say to somebody who thinks that, like, Davka, specifically due to not experiencing Jewish day school, they live a Jewish life they're grateful for?
Well, I want to go back to something that you said before and just say that I think we're in a really experimental phase in Jewish history. First of all, I really support and am a part of Jewish organizations that are completely turning, mainstream Jewish life on its head. And I think that's critically important. And I really see Achvat Olam as part of the experimental phase in Jewish history that we're in, where there's, a new Diasporist minyan every 5 minutes. There's amazing Hebrew school popping up. And I'm fighting for Achvat Olam as I propose it to the Jewish world. It's not an inevitability. And it's possible that the Jewish community may decide, that we're not ready for it or that we don't want it. But I'll say that I'm being met with a lot of enthusiasm. I also want to be really clear. This is not meant to be a sort of copy and paste of your average day school education, but just make it left. We want the way we function to be more democratic and progressive. We want to weave rituals and customs and foodways and languages and pronunciations from across the diaspora into our whole school's way of functioning in the world. We want to talk about Jewish commitment to justice and solidarity and, political movements. Also, of course, the Israel-Palestine piece. We want to have non-nationalist Hebrew learning. There are so many ways in which this is deeply innovative and turning so much on its head. But I just want to be really clear. It's not meant to be Schechter left. I feel like a lot of what I have heard from my friends and comrades in the last 10 years is this profound sense of insecurity, of not knowing what's going on, even in the innovative, radical, experimental Jewish spaces, and wanting to feel a deep sense of belonging. When I close my eyes and I imagine, my dream audience for this school, well, we think of ourselves as having 3 audiences, but one of them is the kind of person who might have had a little bit of Hebrew school education, sort of left Jewish life for many years, and really came back through Palestinian solidarity organizing, like If Not Now, for example. And I see and have heard such a hunger for deep Jewish learning since then. I remember listening to the Judaism Unbound episode with Rabbis Andy Kahn and Alyssa Wise. And I remember Alyssa was saying that she gets so many inquiries and conversations from so many people who want to be rabbis and who want to apply to rabbinical school. She tries to get to the heart of what all of these leftists want out of rabbinical school and why any of them would want to be a rabbi, because, it's such a pain and a commitment. And her takeaway is that all she really heard from so many people is that they really want that depth of learning. And so I'm trying to imagine a world in which people don't have to scramble or feel like they're scrambling in adulthood to get that, but we're just really seeding entire generations of students and, kids who are going to grow up and be the radical innovators of Jewish life. And also, how traditional our curriculum will be and how much it will look like a Jewish day school. A typical Jewish day school is so up in the air. We recently hired what we're calling a consultant for liberatory Jewish education and practice. And that person is really spending the next year thinking about our Jewish learning standards and what do we care to prioritize? What are we perfectly okay deprioritizing? How do we want to be as creative as possible? And what are the priorities of the kinds of people we really care about? And that person's second project is building out the blueprint for Jewish life. What is our approach to tefillah, to prayer, and to keeping kosher? How pluralistic are we committed or are we not committed to being? These are all very much questions up in the air, but I really just want to emphasize that we're so on board with the radical innovation and stay tuned.
So now let's talk the diasporism part. That is also a key part, and it's worth dwelling in. Olam. Achvat olam. Like, olam is the word for the world, or really like the universe, or it's also kind of the word for eternity. It's funny how in Hebrew there's one word for all time and all space, olam. Anywho, but diasporism seems to connect to that notion olam, like the whole world. And I won't say too much about what I think diasporism is because I want to hear it in your voice. But what I want to throw into the mix is that for me, I struggle sometimes when the conversation about diasporism starts and sometimes ends with all sorts of Judaisms all around the world that are just all far away from us and are less about like, what is Jewish in our neighborhood? I'm kind of curious about the Bostonness specifically of this project. And when you're talking about like prioritizations and how we think about Jewish history, like as a diasporist project, what would it look like to both connect to the incredible diversity of Jewish communities and Jewish histories and Judaisms all around the world, and to be like, oh, we're in a particular place in the Doikite sense, in the here-ness sense that is so important for many diasporists. What would it look like to really understand our relationship to the specifics of where we are? And for that, and for you, that means Boston and whatever neighborhood in Boston you'd be in.
Totally. I think diasporism, I'm so excited about the swirl of movement around this term. And also, I do feel like a lot of people mean something different by it, which makes me a little nervous, considering how many people mean something different when they say Zionism. But for Achvat Olam, diasporism means three things. One is that we will uplift and celebrate the wealth of histories, languages, and cultures and Jewish lineages from across the world, and that we're going to decenter the modern nation state of Israel as being core to Jewish identity, while of course holding that half of global Jewry lives there, including many of our family and community members. It also means that our teaching around Israel-Palestine will not be adopting ethno-nationalism as a pathway to Jewish safety and thriving. And we're going to teach that our future is inextricably bound to the future of all people. And it also means that we really want to invest in our roles as residents, neighbors, and community members of Greater Boston. And it is my intention that Achvat Olam will have very deep and close partnerships in the community. And I have a dream of an organizing curriculum for middle schoolers that will also be tied up with their Bar Mitzvah preparation that will bring them into the community as organizers and change makers.
So I was talking to a friend recently who is a Zionist and heard about Achvat Olam and said to me kind of, what does that mean, diasporism or diasporist? And I said, well, I mean, I don't know. It could mean a lot of different things, and I don't know exactly what it means to them. And as we talked about it, I said, look, I think it could mean a version of anti-Zionism, like what we're about is not being Zionist. Or it could be saying something more closer to the way we think of pluralism. I think of a school that might be a God-optional Jewish day school. That doesn't mean that you can't believe in God or aren't allowed to believe in God and to go there, that you would feel uncomfortable believing in God. The hope would be that whether you believe in God or whether you don't believe in God, you're comfortable there. And that would require that we're not placing God at the center of how we're understanding Judaism. We're understanding that Judaism is something else, a culture, people, whatever you want to say. And some people really emphasize a version that has God at the center, and some people don't. So I'm curious, and maybe there are others. Maybe there are other ways to think about it. So I'm curious, in general, when people talk about diasporism, how you think about that, and also specifically at Achvat Olam, like, would a kid whose family is Zionist, is the goal that they should feel comfortable sending their kid to Achvat Olam, or probably that's not the right school for them?
I think there are going to be people who interpret diasporism to mean that you don't talk about Israel-Palestine at all and you really just focus on the diaspora. And then I think there are people who, when they say diasporism, are having a wink and a nod to being left on an Israel-Palestine political issue. And I could imagine that there will be people who, enroll in Achvat Olam who are both I think there'll be folks who are disappointed that we're not talking about Israel-Palestine enough. And there'll be people who are like, I really care about Yiddish and this is way too much Israel-Palestine for me. That's not what my diasporism means. As far as people who identify as Zionists, I would say that I think there are some really amazing Jewish day schools all over Boston. We have a very saturated day school landscape. And when I imagine Achvat Olam, I do primarily imagine people who don't identify as Zionist. And if there is somebody who identifies as maybe a progressive Zionist or something, and they want to come to Achvat Olam, they are welcome. But I feel like sometimes what I see is, I don't want to use the word catering, but a sort of shifting priorities or language to make those folks comfortable. It matters to me that, the families who enroll in Achvat Olam are all comfortable sometimes and uncomfortable sometimes. I think that's probably good for all of us. But in terms of prioritization, I think those folks would maybe be a little bit uncomfortable in a way that I would think is good. And some of those folks are probably uncomfortable at other Jewish day schools because of the way that those Jewish day schools approach Israel-Palestine. And it's sort of a choose your preferred discomfort.
I'm thinking about a lot of friends that I know that are, I would say technically they're Zionists, but they send their kids to a Jewish day school and they're unhappy because basically that's all that's going on in the school. It's like you say, I think that a lot of day schools, a lot of Jewish institutions have become so focused on Zionism that in many ways it's a version of Judaism that has Israel at the center. We've explored that on the show in all kinds of ways. One could imagine that an alternative to that could exist is a school or other kinds of institutions that just say, like, Judaism's a big thing and there's lots of different things going on. And sometimes we talk about Israel and sometimes we don't. But really, that's not what this is about. What this is about is trying to imagine a Judaism in which Israel is part of it. For some people live in Israel, all that's going on. And yet we don't have to put that at the very center of the school versus an approach that says we kind of are putting it at the center of the school, just in a different way. And, that wouldn't necessarily satisfy those people who are sending their kids to a regular day school today, but feel like it's too much Israel, too much of the time.
Mm-hmm.
That the heartbreak for me is what's available for those folks, right?
Totally. I can imagine that there are lots of entry points to Achvat Olam, people who care about local organizing and want their children to know how to do that and be participants in their community. Maybe there's a family who IDs as progressive Zionist, but they have like a trans child and would love to have a queer or trans teacher of Talmud. There are families who are really excited about Yiddish. I have a dream of, diasporic language electives for middle schoolers. So I do think there are a lot of entry points for people who want to see other things emphasized. My next consultant hire that I dream of for 2027, and we're in 2025 right now at the end, is somebody who's really going to talk to a lot of people and help us determine our approach from there. Everything that we do at every point up until this point has been with a lot of buy-in and consultation from representatives of our dream audiences. How much we emphasize Israel-Palestine or not, what's important for my dream audience is for our values to be stated very clearly. That is what builds trust for people to want to walk in the door to begin with. That's sort of we want to state our values clearly so that people are eyes wide open and can opt in or opt out. And I think that really builds trust with the kind of people I most dream of.
Yeah. So, quick sidebar. It's fun talking to someone whose organization doesn't exist yet. We've done it a few times. This is not the first time we've done it, but it's one of a small number of Judaism Unbound conversations. And there is a specific kind of openness that you can inhabit when it's not real yet, that I actually think is really important. And so I'm glad we're having this conversation. The downside is that we also don't know if this organization, like you said, will come to be. You're making an ambitious play. It's multi-year. You're really putting a lot into this with the knowledge that it may not pan out, which I want to commend you for. I think it's very hard to do that. I want to think about in the magic world, in not 4 years or so when you're hoping to initially start, but in 10 years, 20 years, let's inhabit the world where this project, Achvat Olam, succeeds, where there is this school, it's part of the Boston landscape, it's filling a niche in the ecology of that ecosystem. I want to think about what changes, because what's so funny is when I go and visit synagogues, I often connect with their board, and one of the first questions I ask is, if you didn't exist tomorrow, what would the tragedy be? Like, what is it that your organization does that nobody else does, such that you falling off the face of the earth as an organization, and I don't mean like your people would die. Obviously, that would be a tragedy. But like, if your organization didn't exist, why would that be bad? Because that's another way of articulating why your organization should exist in the world, like what its goals are. But so for you, I want to ask, if you did exist, what's different? What starts to change in this ecosystem? Because I will tell you, I don't think you would just be a day school. I think immediately in those first few years, you'd have a slew of people that want bar mitzvahs with you, but that are not sending their students to your school full time, maybe. I think there are people that might reach out to you to do a baby naming long before their kids are school aged. I think you might, like, if you exist and were like an institution with a pulse that was Jewish left and public facing, that would immediately make you a huge presence for a large group of people that are pining for stuff right now. And so I guess I'm kind of curious, again, what would change about the community writ large if you existed?
Well, I'm dreaming of a world in which diasporism really becomes the animating characteristic of Jewish life in the United States. And I think that robust Jewish education for people who share those political values is really critical for that. I see our, God willing, our graduates growing up to be starting their own Jewish organizations, being Jewish educators, creating vibrant prayer spaces, being Jewish artists, doing things that are completely untraditional from a place of real knowledge and competence and confidence. I see our graduates going off to be organizers in movement spaces who move with a safety for Jews through solidarity with other marginalized communities approach to organizing. I also see the potential for change in other day schools just by our very existence. I had a conversation with somebody a couple months ago who was closely connected to an admissions director at a local Jewish day school. And we were talking, she's not somebody who's necessarily aligned with my school, but she sort of admitted that it had her like quaking in her boots a little bit to imagine the impact of Achvat Olam getting off the ground in Boston. Not because we would poach families from other Jewish day schools, definitely not, but because of the impact of, seeing a growing presence of people who want explicitly progressive and left Jewish education and how that might impact the Jewish mainstream. There are whispers of diasporists and liberatory Jewish summer camps that I could imagine having a sort of seamless partnership with in some way. But in terms of the life cycle events, one thing that I am just so heartened by is how much our diasporist movement is growing. I feel like, I lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, like 5 years ago, and there were no non-Zionist minions, and now there are like 4. So I'm just really heartened by the idea that I actually don't have to hold all of the excitement and angst and desire in our community. And of course, if inquiries come in, I could imagine being flexible and excited by something. But I'd say my main orientation is this is a gargantuan effort that is not inevitable. And we really want to try to do one thing really well so that, God willing, the next Achvat Olam will pop up in Philly or the Bay or Chicago or Brooklyn. I think also one of the benefits of private school is that it can sort of be a small scale laboratory for things that may not get to be covered as intensely in a public school setting, like an anti-racism curriculum that is robust. We get to teach sort of our approach to combating anti-Semitism, to be deeply queer and trans affirming. Those are some things that come to mind.
Are there models, let's say, outside the Jewish community whether it's a model of a school or models of other organizations that have that kind of structure that are succeeding. I mean, I think I'm not probably the first to point out. I mean, right, some of the problem with a day school, for example, or any institution is it's also it's a business in a certain way, right? And it's got to get people to pay the money and to or raise money from donors, and it's got to kind of be structured in a certain way so that it kind of lives in a capitalist society, and at the same time to hold values that are potentially at odds with the society. Not suggesting that that's not a good idea, just I think it's a hard thing. So I'm wondering if you look out in the world and you say, oh, actually, there are some good models that inspire us to know that this can be done.
I think a lot of that exploration is happening right now. We're definitely looking into democratic schools and how they function and looking at some of their, some of what makes them so successful and powerful, and have alumni look back and think it was like the highlight of their childhood. And also some of the huge pitfalls and some of the things the democratic schools struggle with most. So that is something that's probably, in terms of a model, something that we're looking at. And again, the extent to which we're going to be known as like a democratic school is certainly up in the air. But we're also looking at, Montessori schools where there are co-teaching models. I mean, you're definitely catching me in a big planning phase. A lot of these questions, we're really spending the next, I would say, 2 years really building out the core DNA of the school.
Awesome. So my next question relates to the fact that, and we don't talk about this enough, but it's not only Jews who go to Jewish day schools. Now, it's not every Jewish day school that has non-Jewish students, but there are some. It's always striking to me which spaces we think of as more likely to have, which Jewish spaces we think of as more likely to have non-Jews in them. I think almost everybody is aware, like you go to a JCC's gym, you go to a Jewish Community Center's gym, like there's a lot of people there who are members even who are not Jews. And that's just like, of course, like there's people who they live close by, it's a good gym, and they join. There are also Jewish schools. Maybe this is best known on a preschool level, but there are lots of families who are like, we don't care if it's a Jewish school. If it's a good preschool, like we'll send our kids there and they're not Jewish, and like, cool. We're thrilled they learn about Judaism because it's nice to learn about another culture that isn't yours. Or it's like, we're neutral about that, whatever, fine. Like if it's a good school, great. That does also operate for some Jewish day schools. And I think in a context where you're specifically thinking about the siloing off of Jews from non-Jews, it feels important to ask how you're approaching that. Now, I want to anticipate that, like many of our other questions, it might be that you haven't fully decided yet. But I guess I am curious, what does feel decided about that? Like what feels like a for sure in terms of how you want to relate to Jews and non-Jews, or people who are Jewish and something else, people who are not sure how they define their families. What might that look like in your context? And maybe if it's not just about Achvat Olam, because I think we're getting drawn into a loop of like, what are you going to do at Achvat Olam specifically? I'm also curious, just generally, your thoughts about the Jewish day school ecosystem and the spaces that do welcome students who are not Jews and those who don't.
I really appreciate this question. So from where I'm sitting right now, and we've sort of gone back and forth on this, well, we would certainly accept students who are Jewish and something else, most definitely. And I was originally sort of opposed to accepting non-Jewish students, and I totally have seen that in the preschool arena, and that feels like a different question to me. But I was recently speaking to a day school principal who have non-Jewish students who are children of non-Jewish faculty. And she made a really beautiful case for that, which is that those educators, especially because children of educators at Jewish day schools also tend to have a sort of discount on tuition, she framed it as sort of an equity issue, which I thought was really interesting and was moved by. And she also was reflecting on some like scary emergency or safety thing that might have happened at the school. I don't remember the details. And she was just like, wow, our educators, all of our educators, including the non-Jewish ones, in any school environment might be risking their lives to come teach at a Jewish school, and they should most definitely be allowed to have their students attend the school. And I was pretty moved by that and would be open to that. I think outside of that, strong and positive identity for any marginalized identity is really formed most fully when children are in environments that honor and reflect their whole selves as much as possible. And Judaism would be the organizing principle of the school. So I would want to put our energy in the sort of resisting the siloing of Jewish students to be in other ways in connecting with public school peers and non-Jewish students outside the school and having like deep and meaningful community partnerships outside the school.
Because of, again, the ways in which I really, and part of this is my own like interfaith family and the ways in which I like take as a Jewish obligation interaction with not Jewish people and world. Like, what's funny is for a diasporist organization, or really in this case, for an organization that is creating space for those who are non-Zionist and anti-Zionist, it feels like a big question, because what I spend so much of my time doing is arguing that to be a Jewish place, to be a Jewish space, does not mean that you are a space that contains only or predominantly Jews necessarily. Some of my favorite Passover Seders have been me, my wife who's not Jewish, and maybe there's a couple of our friends who are Jewish, but a lot of our friends who are almost all not Jewish in a room. And like, it's been a Jewish room, right? Like, I don't know what that means to say, but I know it's true. And given that part of what motivates non-Zionist, anti-Zionist, diasporists, whatever language we want to use, is the belief that there could be a future where people in a particular land who are Jewish and otherwise would share either a binational state or a confederation or something where it would still have a kind of Jewish character, but it wouldn't be characterized by being specifically Jewish. I guess it feels like that maps onto the question of Jewish schools. If a mobilizing politics is that there could be a place in another region that is Jewish in a meaningful way, but which doesn't have sort of Jewish predominance centered in the same way Zionism currently does through right of return, through other things. I don't want to be overly challenging because I give a monthly donation to your thing. Like, I like what you're doing, but I guess, do you see that connection? Would you push back on it?
We don't usually comment on each other's questions, but I think I really endorse your question, Lex.
Well, first of all, I agree with you. And I want to be really clear that a huge amount of energy and intention and thoughtfulness will be put to how to make sure that children of interfaith families will feel like their whole selves are seen and loved in the room. I just want to be really clear about that. And I agree with you that a Jewish space is not made a Jewish space by the amount of Jews in the room. I think there's something there for me about these being some of the like core foundational years of Jewish knowledge building, where so much time and energy is devoted on such specific content knowledge that might just be, I just sort of imagine kind of a waste of time for somebody who's not going to grow up and have it be a part of their life practice. But I feel like for other Jewish spaces, also for adult Jewish learning spaces, I completely agree with you.
I mean, I think this is so interesting because I think it also brings us around, towards the end of our conversation to where we started, which is really on this question of the role of a day school and what a day school is doing. I'm curious if we could just explore that a little bit more from your perspective. I mean, I think like part of what I heard at the beginning and when we've talked before is you saying like you had this really positive experience in a day school and it shaped you in ways that you are aware of and grateful for and that have colored the direction of where you've gone. So I'm curious if we could go into that a little bit more granularly and maybe objectively and say kind of what are the things that a day school does that maybe other kinds of contexts can't do? And I wonder, like I'm thinking about the economic element of it as not distinct from this question, because in a way, the question is about who's willing to pay for that and how much are they willing to pay, which, by the way, is not just a question for day schools by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's a major question that we've asked on Judaism Unbound over the years. And it's also a major question that I ask now as a funder, because I think that over the last 20, 30 years, there's been, I think it probably started with Birthright Israel, interestingly for this conversation, but I I think that there's this kind of notion that Judaism should be as cheap as possible, as close to free as possible. I mean, I think that that's what a lot of funders have caused, and that's what a lot of Jews have come to expect. And so when we're talking about a pretty expensive Jewish item like day school, right, if it's not heavily subsidized by philanthropy, which probably for a diasporist kind of day school is less likely, it really is a question of who's going to pay for that. And I wonder, like, maybe some non-Jews, maybe a lot of non-Jews would actually pay, right? Because they would think that this is a great education. And I find a lot of non-Jews actually don't find the Jewish stuff to be a waste of time. They actually appreciate it at a level that most Jews don't. And so I'm curious about that. But the main thing that I really wanted to start with was just understanding in a deep way, as you see it, how does a day school function and what does it do, particularly what does it do that's extra special and valuable?
Well, I guess I want to start by saying that if I had to take one thing that I think Achvat Olam could do, or why I think day schools have such potential, is that I want the Jewish left to be real players in Jewish life and sort of taking back from our mainstream Jewish institutions what Jews as a whole are understood to believe or think or do. And I really believe that, not to sound like a mainstream Jewish person, but I really do believe that Jewish literacy is really critical to that, so that in order that we are able to turn it all on its head from a place of real knowledge, as opposed to perhaps from a place of an absence of knowledge. One of the things that I feel was most powerful about day school, and I don't even know that I had that great of a day school education, is that it made my Jewish identity not a chore. I already had to be at school. I already had to do things I wasn't that excited to do. So it just made Jewish life and practice so stuck to my bones in a way that has really shaped me, shaped the trajectory of my life. I really hear from parents of Hebrew school students and from most of the people I know who have ever had a Hebrew school education, it feels like such a chore. And that's not to disparage Hebrew school. And there's some really amazing Hebrew school educators out there. I feel blessed to know so many of them. But I feel like that is a challenge that is hard to get around.
What do you think are the practical things that a day school does that have that effect?
I think even just blessing your food every day and praying together every morning. I expect it will be creative and turned on its head in its own way, but just having Jewish rituals a part of your everyday life, I feel really shape who you are doing. I feel really comfortable at a Seder because I did a mock Seder every year of my life with all of my closest friends. I think there's a sort of a way in which integrated education makes for more integrated people. And I feel like this sort of not compartmentalizing, my Jewish self with the rest of myself by being I practice Judaism potentially on the weekends or in this very specific space is so meaningful. I'm also just thinking I was very blessed to go to a Jewish day school that took place in my synagogue. So also where I learned to pray every morning was also where I got bat mitzvahed. And my rabbi was also my Talmud teacher and the person who married my sister and brother-in-law. To your question about funding, I mean, that's the biggest open question is the funding model, day school funding models are really, really challenging for day schools all over the country who don't have a narrow ideological project and who don't have a narrow audience of people. And it remains a huge question. I'm heartened by what I'm seeing as a growing Jewish left world of philanthropy. And I am also trying to make the case to non-Jewish funders who are committed to Israel-Palestine work. And the case I'm trying to make for them is that American Jews have influence in, the shape of the conversation, especially in this country. And if there were generations of Jews who were growing up and thinking differently about Israel-Palestine, who knows what the conversation might look like and what direction things might head in.
I'm curious about two things that, again, are sort of inhabiting the future where Achvat Olam exists and is thriving. One of them is And I hate this question even as it's coming out of my mouth, but I feel drawn to ask it anyway. Because I don't believe in successful human beings versus non-successful human beings. But like, what does it look like for somebody who would go to your school and emerge from it, and they then live their life in a way that you would call success? Like, you've had the impact that you wish you would have. Because I will tell you, one of my key struggles with Jewish day schools that I know of, and not just day schools, but like Jewish educational institutions, is that I think their answer to that question is that all of their students they would call successful, quote unquote, live Jewishly. They do a lot of Jewish things in their life. Cards on the table, I genuinely think that some of them, if they had the choice between, like, they're blind, all they know about their students, their campers, their alumni is in one pile, this is a group that spends a huge amount of their waking hours in Jewish spaces, but you know nothing about their actions and values in the world. You only know that they spend time in Jewish spaces. And in the other pile, these are people that live justice-driven, liberatory, amazing lives and never set foot in Jewish institutions. I genuinely think that there are many people on the boards of many Jewish educational institutions who would pick the pile of people that live their lives in quote-unquote Jewish spaces, but are not at all, I don't think they'd pick people that are directly oppositional to their values. But if they were just kind of blind and didn't know, they'd prefer the ones that are in Jewish spaces and could go any direction with political values or otherwise, to the group that has wonderful values-driven, aligned values, but they never set foot in Jewish spaces. I guess I'm kind of wondering, what would success look like? Because I don't think you would answer that way. Like, I genuinely don't think that's your presupposition. My curiosity is, what is yours?
Yeah, I definitely, God forbid, would never answer that question that way. I think success to me looks like generations of Jews who grow up for whom Judaism and justice are core to who they are and mutually reinforcing. I see them as participants in thriving Jewish communities in whatever way lights them up, with 1,000 possible entry points for what that looks like. And they, through their own Jewish practices or ways of living life, invite others into a vibrant, justice-oriented Jewish communities as well, you know, as artists, healers, educators, rabbis. I imagine people that, you know, our students grow up to also raise other generations of lefty Jews who are building and sustaining diasporist Jewish life. And I also see success as our students growing up and being out in the non-Jewish world as sort of representatives of politically committed Jews who are in solidarity with other marginalized communities and who combat anti-Semitism with a safety through solidarity approach. So it is both that they are builders of Jewish communities that are bright and sustaining, and also that they are out in the non-Jewish world.
I'm realizing, you know, as we finish this out, people are in their cars or they're prepping dinner and they have a podcast rolling, listening to our voices. What do you want them sitting with as they emerge from this episode and consider the question of a diasporist Jewish day school? What do you want to plant the seed for in our listeners as they consider the importance of organizations like yours?
I think that Achvat Olam could really move mountains, both for the future of the Jewish left and also the impact that it could have on the rest of American Jewish life. And I really want people to know also that it's my sincerest hope that Boston is really just the first stop on our journey, and that even if you don't live in Boston, if you care about the future of the Jewish left, that it should be vibrant and robust, and that there should be as many of us as possible across our country, then, you know, if you're listening anywhere other than Massachusetts, like, this school still is for you and could touch your life and your community. And even if you don't consider yourself a day school person, which I'm sure many of your listeners don't, I really believe that Achvat Olam has the power to move all of us.
Thank you so much, Leah Robbins, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I deeply appreciate it.
And thanks so much to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation. We hope that you'll tune in again in the future. As we close, a quick reminder that the day this episode is being released on January 16th, 2026, we have Shabbat Unbound tonight. So if you're listening on the release date of this episode, head to JudaismUnbound.com/Shabbat. You can register for tonight's gathering. We can't wait to see you. We're going to be diving into the prayer Ma'ariv Aravim, a prayer about the evening time, which is part of the evening Shabbat service. So that's going to be a great time. If you're listening after the release date, that's okay. That is most of you probably. What you can do is you can sign up at JudaismUnbound.com/Shabbat for next month's gathering, because I know you're really bummed that you didn't hear about this month's until after it happened. Make sure that doesn't happen again by signing up for February's gathering right now, and then you'll get reminders, all that good stuff. On that note, we will close things, and as we do so, we encourage you to be in touch with us with any questions, ideas, visions you have for the Jewish future. All of that is super welcome. You can be in touch with us in any of the following ways. First, there's our Facebook and Instagram handles. Both of those are at Judaism Unbound. Second, you can always head to our website, JudaismUnbound.com, to check out show notes for this episode and all sorts of other goodies. Third, email us. We love when you are in touch via email, dan@JudaismUnbound.com and/or lex@JudaismUnbound.com to do that. The last request we'd make is that we're always deeply appreciative to those of you who are able to make a financial donation to support our work. You can do that on either a monthly recurring basis or via a one-time gift by heading to JudaismUnbound.com/donate. So thank you so much for listening, and with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.